Hi, how y'all doing? Welcome back. I'm Terry Martin.
And I'm Mike Eisenzimmer, and this is Terry and Ike's Fantasy Football and Beer Lounge. Today is a special treat, especially for you beginners and the football widows, the fantasy football
Don't
widows.
call us football widows. We're just females wanting to play fantasy football. Yeah, girls, if you don't know the definition of female.
Well, today we have a real treat. Terry's brother, Paul, is visiting us from Florida, and he is a big football geek. As a matter of fact, he's Terry's family league commissioner. He's a very competitive footballer. So this is a real treat. So enjoy this, please.
And without further ado, Paul Martin.
There you go.
All right. So again, we're trying to help all the widows out there, the fantasy football widows, and this is how the pterodactyl got into fantasy football. She got sick of being a widow and not being able to participate or talk to her husband during football season. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure there's a lot of ladies out there that feel that way. But I'm telling you, you listen to Paul, you too can have a competitive team and go kick your boyfriend or your husband's butt in the same league.
Or your
Try it
girlfriend's
out.
butt. Calm
That's right.
down.
We got Paul, we got Terry to help you lead the way. So Paul, as a rookie fantasy football team manager, what would be your number one advice? What would you say first of all?
Well, first thing you should do if you're a fantasy widow and you want to get involved in fantasy football is start reading articles on fantasy. That's the first thing you got to do because you
Right.
got to familiarize yourself with rosters, especially as we were discussing earlier this morning before we went on camera. There has been so many changes to lineups and personnel this past season that even experienced fantasy participants are going to have a good time trying to keep track of where all the players are.
Yeah.
Because they've all moved around. So it's always important to read. It's always important to there are many experts on fantasy, people who have been doing it a long time and have more greater detailed information than most of us, even experienced managers. And if you're a new manager especially, you got to get up to speed on who the players are, where they play, where are the best fantasy players, how do you score fantasy points, so you know what attributes of a player, players you're looking at to draft, you know which attributes to look for in regards to being able to perform fantasy
Yeah, but I have a
points.
question. With that much change on the rosters, should I take that player's previous record really and apply it? Would it be the same on the next team that they might have moved to? Or are you really kind of pulling your luck there to think you'll have the same stats coming from those players?
Well, that's a good question, but it depends on the situation. If you have someone like, let's say, Devontae Adams, who's a great stud fantasy receiver, yeah, he had Aaron Rodgers to throw to him. Okay, Derek Carr may not be exactly Aaron Rodgers because there aren't many that are, but Devontae Adams was like the sole receiver threat on his team with Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers found him open all the time because he's a great receiver and he gets open. So he's moving to a new scheme, but it's also a pass-oriented scheme, and it's got an experienced quarterback and other weapons available to him. And I think the benchmark or the market.
Take him as he's.
I'd take him pretty high compared to, based on his history, because I don't see him. Would he necessarily lose some numbers because of
switch, yeah.
changing quarterbacks? Well, of course, Aaron Rodgers is he's a once in a lifetime 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the league, so he's a rare talent, and Derek Carr is not as good as him. But
Right, but what about their offensive lines too? There's a big factor there that
Well, I think
some of these offensive lines will not be able to keep the coverage or protect.
No, and that's true. And if I were talking about if he'd gone to Pittsburgh with no decent quarterback and a different offensive line that's getting old and failing, I wouldn't have anywhere near as high hopes. But the Raiders actually have a pretty good offensive line.
There you go.
And I would expect them to be able to protect. They protected Derek Carr pretty good last year when he didn't have Devontae Adams. And I think with Devontae Adams, he's just going to have more of a vertical threat and an open guy who can get open all the time. I think they could put up some big numbers. Maybe not as right off the bat as big as with Rodgers, but I think he'll be a factor.
That's cool.
Paul, that's a lot to consider for a newbie. All right, so would you recommend, what kind of league would you recommend for a first timer? Would you do standard league? Would you do PPR? Would you do 10 team, 12 team, 14 team? I mean, if,
Would you pay for it?
chances are the widow's not be able to get in the same league with the husband.
We don't want to be in the same
So
one.
what you want to do is you want to force your husband or girlfriend, your whatever fantasy football geek you love, to make a league that you can join with him, so you can compete with him and show him what you got. So, and I think that confuses a lot of people. The league, the league scoring system and all that. I mean, you got to know what your scoring system is to be able to pick right, to pick your team right. So, like for instance, Paul is a commissioner in a
PPR, 12-man PPR
12
league.
Tell
12 team.
us what that means. 12-team PPR. Give us a kind of a rundown. What should you know about a PPR league versus standard league?
All right, PPR league means points per reception. So the reason
There's a point.
Okay, there you go. Point per receptions. Every time one of your skill position players catches a football, some leagues it's only half point. Most leagues it's a point. And what's happened over the last several years in the NFL is it's become a much more pass-happy offense. The traditional power running back game with throwing 15 passes a game, that's pretty much gone now. So you got everybody throwing the ball, and so if they're all throwing the ball all the time, that means the wide receivers, the tight ends, and the running backs are all getting a lot more opportunities to catch the ball. If you use standard scoring, you go to a standard scoring league, you don't get any points for receptions. So this pass-happy offense, NFL that we're in right now, you get a lot fewer points. Now, I don't know which method is better, but the way we've gone pass-happy over the last 5 years, I changed us to PPR years ago, and I think it's the way to go in terms of scoring because it gives you a lot more opportunity to score
It
points.
seems to be a little
And
more
more
exciting.
people get
It seems
to
be a little
score.
more exciting and higher scores.
Definitely higher scoring.
Yeah.
And more people get to score versus it just being, between the quarterback running in for the touchdown or just one throw to, or handoff, et cetera, correct? I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's
less.
right.
So
Well, plus the
And
running
it's
backs,
fun.
Plus the running back scoring, for example, based on yards carried. The running backs, before PPR, the running backs got, because they
Most of
usually
the
had more
points.
opportunity to touch the ball during a game and more carries, they got more chances to score a lot of points. In PPR league, you're taking into account that wide receivers in a pass-happy league like it is right now, especially, the receivers carry a lot more ability to carry the game by receptions. But in the old scoring method, if they got 15 receptions in a game and 100 yards, then they basically got the same amount of points as a running back who got 100 yards on 25 carries. So the fact was they weren't getting much credit for the fact that they were helping control the offense and keep the possession of the ball for their team. So what PPR also did was rectify that by giving the receivers more points for actually catching the ball, keeping possession, moving it down the field. So that's what I like about it is receivers a lot more, as Terry says, a lot more opportunity to score points because
More players.
Everybody who's in the pass attack basically is now involved in terms of generating points on every play, because if they catch a ball or catch a reception downfield, well, it doesn't even have to be a positive play. On PPR, you get a point or half point, even if your person who received the ball lost yardage on the play.
And like we had last year with all the injuries, you get an injury on your team, and if it was the old school, that could have been the end of your game. Now, with PPR, you're allowed, like you said, you can throw to so many different players, and everybody gets a score, or everybody gets to at least try to give you points.
In terms of numbers, if you're looking for a league to join, and you're wondering what about the difference between the numbers of teams involved, because you can get anywhere from an 8 to a 10, all the way up to 14 or 16 teams in a league. What I will say about that is a lot of the pro pickers on ESPN, CBS Sportsline, those types of channels, a lot of them, the top-notch players, the ones that are considered to be the experts in fantasy, they play usually in a 10-team league. 10-team leagues are interesting because there's fewer
quality
teams of
spread,
roster,
yeah.
right?
So
the
each team's going to be a tighter
everybody's going to have a
competition.
better roster,
Yep.
blah blah blah. So that's good, and also usually means higher scoring because the 10 teams have more talent over their rosters, so they end up
Right.
with higher scores. 12,
Scoop this one.
sure. 12 is 12's an interesting number because it's easier usually to divide up for playoffs and that kind of stuff because
So stop.
Yeah, 12.
because it's even numbers. So 12's a good number, and the league. Ever since I've started playing fantasy, I've always been in a 12-team league.
And also with our family, we had such family members. To get everybody in, you needed a larger. You needed to have more teams. I mean, like 12 versus 10.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
our
you're
family
trying to
was big. You're
accommodate
trying to
the
accommodate the family.
Yeah.
But some of these other leagues, then how do I know which one that I want to be in? Whenever, I mean, you can get online and pay for and become anybody's team player. So who do I mean, how do you know which group to join?
Well,
Just the luck of the draw?
What I would recommend to anybody who's starting out in fantasy football is there are plenty of free leagues to play in.
Right.
And
Practice.
if you don't know anybody to invite you into a league that already exists or whatever with people that you know, which I think, to me, it always holds a lot more interest if you're playing against people you know instead of people who are just
You don't know,
That's 'cause
right?
You like to smack talk all the time.
Well, you like that. You know, it's like competition, like anything else. It's more fun to beat people you know, and people, family members, friends. But if you don't have anything like that going on to start out with, then basically there are plenty of sites where you can go on and join a league basically at random.
You could join a league of strangers and get to know them. And then
That's
hate
what we
them, and
did
then hate
with,
'em.
with our Fuzzies team.
And hate them while they're beating you because you don't know necessarily what you're doing yet, but you'll learn.
Right.
So it's kind of that would be an interesting approach. You could basically just join a fantasy league of people you don't know.
Now,
Go from there.
your 12-team league is on Yahoo, right? Isn't it Yahoo?
Yeah, well, it was
Yahoo
we were on
Sports?
when I started playing on fantasy. We were on CBS Sports Line, and it was really good site, good drafting, all that jazz. They communicated very well with you, and blah blah blah. But CBS Sports Line eventually started charging. Well, they actually charged to begin with. That was actually a money league.
Those bastards.
But they started raising their rates on what it was costing them or whatever. And when we started setting up the Martin Stock League, what we wanted to do there was we wanted to give the family members an opportunity to participate and go up against each other. And since it's a family thing, we're not trying to make any money on each other, so there's no money involved. So if you're not having any money involved, it makes no sense to go on a pay site. So Yahoo doesn't charge for accommodating our league and setting up. We have a draft available.
Well,
yeah, you beat me in the semifinals this year.
So how many rounds of drafting is in your league?
We have 15 roster positions, so it's a 15-round
Okay,
draft.
and you start nine players, I think.
You start 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, quarterback, tight end, and defense.
Kicker and defense.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we got up to
so
3.
instead of 3 wide receivers, it's 2. Well, you have to have 2 wide receivers, two running backs, and a flex.
That's right. Flex
So you could have 3 wide receivers. You could have 3 running backs. You could have 2 tight ends.
Right. Yeah,
On that
flex position is one of the more recent additions to rostering, which makes things a lot more
Gives you more
adjustable.
options.
Gives you more options,
yeah.
and you can cover if you get one of your better players goes down with an injury one week. You come in the next week, you've got the ability to manipulate your roster better because if you happen to be weak in the position the person got injured in, you've got the ability to use the flex position to bring in somebody else deeper on your roster, a position that you have better depth in, so you can move them in and keep your machine going while you're waiting for your injured player to come back.
Right on. And kickers. Let's go over the kicker score because I know a lot of ladies like to pick kickers early because they're so cute. They do score a lot of points.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, hey.
Very rarely do you see a football player's face. So how am I going to judge based on their color? I mean, the good
I've
looks.
observed some of your past.
Might be the spread of his leg that would be my attention.
Simmer down. But I think this was kind of a recent changes where they started giving kickers more points based on how far they kicked the ball. Like instead of just getting 3 points for a field goal, you got like 5 points for a 50-yard field goal.
Right.
Yeah, so that's.
Well, in the early days, they didn't do that?
So what I'm saying is get a kicker with a strong leg.
3 points for everything.
Yeah, get a kicker with a strong leg.
In fact, in the early days, actually, if your field goal was inside of 30 yards, you only got 2 points. So, yeah, these days with
They're making everybody's position
first
worth
of all,
it.
there's a couple of things going there. There's more flexibility in the scoring, more range of scoring. So if you have a kicker who's got a 50-yard plus leg and he's consistent with it, someone like Justin Tucker on the Ravens, you're going to get more points out of your kicker than a kicker who can't kick 50 yards, field goals, because they won't get as many opportunities. And when they do make field goals, they'll
They might
be
not
a
get it.
shorter
Yep.
duration, and they won't get you as many points. The way I look at kickers, though, is there are 2 or 3 in the league that you would definitely like to have on your team because they will add consistent point totals for you. Maybe they're on an offense that stalls out of the red zone a lot, so you end up with a lot more field goal opportunities. That's nice to have, but the fact is, kicker points usually aren't going to make the difference between whether you.
They're not going to make or
win
break
not.
you. Not even in a tie.
No, they might. A really hot day, 20-point day, which is a rare day for a kicker, but you can get them. You get a 20-point day and a day where you really need points. Well, yeah, it's great, but you can't. It's just like a defense, 25-point defense, but you can't count on those very often either.
There we go. So Polly Poo, what does streaming mean? I see streaming defenses, streaming quarterbacks. I'm confused. What does that mean?
All right, I understand what streaming positions mean, and especially popular in defenses, kickers, maybe even quarterbacks on people. If you don't draft one of the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the league or whatever, and you go later in the draft to get better position players, so you're down to having to draft, later in the round, and so you're the quarterback that you get maybe not a top first or even second tier quarterback. What streaming does is it allows you to basically pick up a free agent quarterback during a week where that free agent quarterback not only being available, but they're playing against a team that you think they're really going to take advantage of in the matchup and do well that week. So it gives you the ability to bolster points. You see it usually on defenses and kickers because a defensive team, each week there are going to be some teams that aren't very good, but their defensive matchup's going to be very good because they're playing an even weaker team. And in that particular week, that particular defense could have the opportunity to really give you some points. And so instead of wasting a draft pick in the 10th round or earlier for a defense to get the Ravens defense or somebody like that, you could decide to just every week you go online and look at the free agent defenses that are available and you select the one that's got the best matchup from a fantasy standpoint ability, and you pick them up and drop some other extra part of your roster, extra player.
So one real important thing that I've learned, and doesn't have to be a male or a female doing this one, is you have to stay on top of it every day, or your competitors will pick up that defense or pick up that streaming opportunity.
That's right, because
faster.
You probably are not going to be the only person in your league who's doing streaming in those positions, and they're watching that free agents waiver wire very carefully to see who they can pick up for the coming week matchup. So yeah, you have to stay on top of it. You have to probably be
A week ahead.
or two
Yep,
ahead
yep.
to see what's going on, so that you know when it's that week you're on top of it with free agents.
So what?
And who's on
I can't sit
bye.
my roster and just leave it?
No, that's one thing about playing fantasy football. You find out pretty quickly it's not a static process. It's very dynamic. So what happens is people get injured. People just don't develop. You draft a player and they just don't do what
Just
you
not
expect
their
them
luck.
to do.
Yep.
They're not injured, but they're not playing very well. The team's not playing very well. Maybe it's a receiver and a quarterback. It's all of a sudden it's turned out to be a wreck.
Or coaching.
And so you don't get the opportunities you thought you were going to get, so your guy doesn't score any points. So you have to keep looking at your roster as the season goes forth for numerous reasons.
It's a fumble.
Turnovers. You got to pick some guy up, and all he does is turn the ball over. You got to get rid of turnover guys. Turnover guys cost you points, lots of points. Don't want a turnover.
That's right. Turnover, interception, that all goes for your defense. So what about special teams? How did you go out and draft a special team?
Not in any leagues I've ever played in. Don't do special teams. Now you might look.
What if you get a punt return for a touchdown?
Well, the special teams in most leagues, special teams touchdowns like kickoff returns, punt returns, interception returns, safeties. Those all get put in the defensive team pointing scheme. So
That's right. Yeah.
So where it comes in handy is if you have a team that's pretty good defensively, and they're also really good at running back kicks, kickoff returns.
Then you might want to draft that
Chiefs
defense.
were the last few years really good on returns. All those return points go into the receiver points. Sure.
Full Terry, and there you go.
So they go
So you
That
don't
goes
get a
into your
specialty team point. The specialty team is at that time is the defensive part of the game, so they score points for your defense.
That's how it works now, just as a historical point. That's not how it used to work in the old days. In the old days, kickoff returns and punt returns, the only way you scored any points on those is if the guy that actually did the return was the guy on your roster. If you had a running back who also ran back kicks for the team,
Then
and
you
that
got the
running
point.
back
Got it.
scored a touchdown on a kick return, you'd get that touchdown.
Really?
Yeah, back in the old days. But if the team
So it didn't go to the
It
defense; it
very-
actually went to that player.
It varies league
Gotcha.
to league, so make sure you
Read
check
your
league
rules.
score. Read the rules.
You need to
Or-
understand how your league scores. That's what the first thing. And then when you're looking to shop a league, find a league you want to join to start out if you're a novice.
But should the
Some things you wanna
commish
look at.
tell us, or do you ever have like roundtables with your team to get everybody fired up, or is it just free for all?
It's pretty much free for all. Most the leagues I've always been in, the players, the good players, especially the ones who are contending for championships, they're very active all on their own, and they don't ask questions, and they don't want to have a round robin discussion.
And they bitch at the commissioner a lot.
That's right. They want to keep the information they have, and if you don't have it,
Good.
so
That's
bad
competition.
for you.
There you go. We don't want you to know.
So, Paul, since Terry has a team in the family league in Martinstock, would it be okay if we just followed your league throughout the season, just get an update on how Terry's doing in the league, and we'll check on you? What's
Sure.
the name? What's the name of your team?
My team's Gray Panthers.
Gray Panthers. Okay.
Has to do with his
Obvious
hair.
reasons.
Yeah.
I'm old.
So we'll check back in on Martinstock throughout the season, see how you're doing, see how the league is doing, and maybe this year you could come up with a trophy or something. Have everybody chip in $10 and have a trophy or something like that.
Maybe I could actually win
A bronze, have a bronze boot, get a boot bronzed or something,
the boot.
or side bets. That's always good to go.
Where you picked the Bengals and you loaded up
Yeah.
on them just based on your gut feeling.
Right.
So should you go with your gut, Paul, or really kind of pay on the attentions?
Well, you can. One thing I've noticed in playing fantasy football these years is you could be as insightful as you want. You can have as much detailed stats and orientation and things about
frame, Terry. Come in
picking rosters.
here.
But what you find is, despite all your work and whatever, as I said earlier, your roster's dynamic, players are dynamic. You may base your selection of them on the last 5 years, and this is the down year. So you always have to make adjustments. But you're also, when you're drafting your roster, you want to take a look at trending upwards. Young players, maybe only been in the league a year or two and haven't really done all that much, but they're in the right situation at the right time where they might be able to really take off. And when you're drafting, not only are you drafting seasoned, experienced players who have a track record of scoring fantasy points, but you also want to. When I go into a draft, I always have maybe 8 or 10 names.
Step back, Terry. Step back.
8 or 10 names that I put on my list of players to draft that I'm interested in are usually young players who haven't done anything yet, but as you were talking about with the Bengals earlier, it's just a hunch that this may be the year they take off, and you want to ride their coattails to maybe a championship. So that's the type of players or schemes that you're looking for. I tend to not try to draft with too many players from one team, because if that team doesn't do well, then your roster is bad. So
Yeah, you don't want too many
try to
players of the
spread it
same team.
around.
Yeah.
Yep.
Plus,
yep,
some fantasy, remember the idea too is fantasy players on some teams are not on good teams, but they're still very good fantasy players because they generate points for your fantasy score, and that's what you're looking for primarily.
But-
right.
That's right. Let's talk about some tools to help you get prepared. Now, we were talking about research. Yeah, there's loads of magazines. There's tons of propaganda on the internet and stuff. But
Who do you believe anymore? It's kind of like our government.
yeah, but anyhow, I do a lot of drafting. Practice drafting. What do they call that?
Mock draft.
Mock drafting. Yeah, mock
And
drafting.
with mock drafting, you can actually see the points that you're
Right.
going to create, right? Do you do that?
Yeah, I do mock drafting. Unfortunately, what usually happens to me lately, even though I'm retired now and should have even more time to spend on fantasy football than I did in years past, I find that the draft creeps up on me, and it's suddenly going to be here in 4 or 5 hours, and I've not done one mock draft. If there's anything I could suggest to a novice or even an experienced fantasy player, if you don't participate in mock drafts going into each draft season, you're missing a golden opportunity. Because if you know when you draft, in most leagues they announce this a week to 10 days in advance at least. If you know what your draft position is going into your draft, then you need to go on some of these sites. Yahoo's got them, CBS has got them, ESPN's got them. You can go on mock drafts where basically you just hop into a cycle where you join you can join a 10-team league, join a 12-team league,
yep.
14.
And
Find
practice.
a league that's similar to the one that you're going to be participating in. Jump in there, jump into it far enough in advance so you can get your draft position to be pretty close to, if not identical to, the one you're going to be drafting from. Because there's not much point in joining a draft and being in the number one position if you're going to draft 8th. So what you want to do is you want to get into one and get it pretty much mirrored to what you're going to see when it's time for you to do your live draft, your real draft, and then you can actually select a draft, and it goes by very quickly. It doesn't take very long. And what it allows you to do, it allows you to see a whole kind of in-depth analysis of what your roster looks like depending on who you just took in this mock draft in the first round, second round. And you can look and see how it lays out and how you can anticipate players that would be eligible for you to select with much more accuracy than simply reading a chart on tiering. You can look at charts and they show you the tiers of the running backs and the quarterbacks and the wide receivers, and that's important research. But the mock draft actually starts to show you crystallization of what your competitors are looking at out there and who they're selecting in these rounds, and just gives you a lot more of an idea of how accurate you can be on your drafting as opposed to just guessing or just winging it when you start out the first time and you've never seen what the position. Let's say you're drafting 8th. If you haven't drafted 8th in a mock draft, you don't really. A lot of times you don't even know for sure exactly what players are going to be available at the 8th position.
Right. That's what I was getting ready to say when my husband turned me on to mock drafting. It got me more knowledgeable on all of the players in the top. Let's just say the top 8 picks or the top 10 picks, and then it also gets you to do your math so that you know exactly where to do your math, so you know exactly what you've got available within the next, and it goes by real fast. That's the main thing, is you don't have that much time to keep analyzing, so you need to know that number well so you know when you get to draft again and how many players will be gone by the time you get to draft again.
No.
Yeah, all of those things happen. The only thing I'll say about mock drafting, I recommend it. I highly recommend it. But just keep in mind, it's still a mock draft. And when you actually start drafting for real in a dynamic draft in your new league that you're joining or an experienced league, you're going to find the draft looks totally different, or somewhat totally different, because some of your competitors are going to start selecting people in the first and second rounds that those mock drafters
Never
didn't
looked
use.
at. Yep.
They didn't jump up and pick a quarterback in the first round. They didn't jump up and pick a tight end in the first round or a wide receiver at the top of the round. So all of a sudden your round looks totally different. But it helps, and it gets you some experience on how drafting works and how building a roster works through the draft. So yeah, you definitely should need to do it, especially if you've never done fantasy before. I wouldn't.
And the other
without
thing,
any mock drafting.
the other thing that it keeps you up to date on who's actually going to start, because a lot of times at the last minute they change, and who you were planning on drafting not even going to be there.
Yeah, what's a snake draft? You see snake.
Sure, snake draft. All right. Well, my leagues have always used a snake draft, and what a snake draft means is, let's say the computer has generated for your team a draft that has you a team picking 8th. What it means is a snake draft. It means in the first round of drafting, you will pick 8th out of the 12 or how many teams you got in your league. On the second round, you go down to the end of the first round and you reverse order on the second round. So
There you go.
So the 12th team in the first round picks first in the second round, and then it goes right back up the list of the league. So basically it's called a snake because, as you might imagine by looking at it, you start down the positions, curl, and turn back up, so it looks like this by the time you get
So
down.
if you're drafting 8th in the first round, you'll be drafting 5th in the second round, and so forth. That's the way it's going to be the rest of the way. You'd be 8th and 5th in each round. Right? Yeah.
That is
Right.
correct. And what it also does, for years, a lot of the people that I played with thought picking 12th out of a 12-person league was anathema. It actually turns out the picking 12th is not so bad.
No,
in
because you
some
get
groups,
the-
because you get the first pick in the
Next
next round.
time.
Yeah.
So you double up, you pick 2 picks, and you're done for another 25.
I don't like picking first. I like that 12th. I like to be like 9th, 10th, 11th, somewhere around there. 12th is not bad. It's not a death sentence, like you said.
Well, even if you're first or 12th, you're getting that option.
Yeah, but there's a lot more pressure on you. I think if you the higher up you have to a first round pick, and I've only been able to do that once or twice in my career. A first round pick. The problem with that is there's a lot of pressure on you
Too many
to pick
to
the
pick from.
right player.
Too many to
And
pick
everybody's
from.
out there telling you, like last year, Christian McCaffrey, unanimous #1 pick.
Yep.
2 years before that was Saquon Barkley. The guys who picked those gentlemen first in their league
All
didn't
got
win.
screwed.
Yeah. So if your consensus #1 pick is one who just doesn't have a good year or gets hurt,
You're in trouble.
then you're in trouble because you just put the tremendous amount of weight on that first round pick. So I tend to agree with Ike. I like to pick in the second half of the first round because I get a nice high pick on the second round, and there's less pressure on somebody
Who to
picking
pick.
8th
Yep.
or 10th because top 8 or 10 players in your colleagues' minds have all disappeared, and so you're down to a lot easier draw usually to figure out if you're going to take a running back. You pretty much know who's left at 8 to 10 to 12 that you're going to want to take because the numbers are dwindling. So
Yeah, and also, in a snake draft, especially with 12 teams, you have to stretch sometimes because if there's a guy you want, you go, well, there's like
I'm going to
20
lose
picks
25
until-
players here.
Yep. So sometimes you got to go out of your comfort zone and go out and get that guy before somebody else does. It's called stretching. So be careful with the stretching a little bit. It could get you in trouble. You could actually pass on some bargains. So don't get too enamored with one guy. Don't let it ruin your draft if you don't get that guy. You got to, be versatile, be ready to go.
But
Have
just
a
like
backup-
like Paul
have a
just
backup
said,
plan.
even the number round draft pick could, like Christian McCarthy. What was his total points even last year?
He was injured. He got injured right away.
I know, but I mean, he did come back. But that person had that on his roster, and then you keep him on the bench,
you have to
hoping
carry
that they're
him.
coming back. And when that's a good question, Paul. Is when do you finally dump the lead, even if they're that high up on the roster?
well, usually what happens is because of bye weeks, when the bye weeks start in the scheduling, you start getting holes in your roster
Right.
because the teams that you have selected players from aren't playing that week, so they're not available to you. So what typically happens for most of us is
Have to give up one of
the
those.
speculative picks we've made or the injured picks or anything like that. The people that we put a lot of juice on and they've gotten injured now. You've got roster positions that are going to start getting some pressure on them to do something with them because if you're not getting any production from them, you're going to have to cut them because first of all,
You need
depth
players.
rate, and secondly, more importantly, right now is you need to draft another position that you've got need on because you've got an injury or a non-productive player, whatever it is. A hole in your roster has to be filled. You got to come up with that somewhere, and those reserve positions you got are very valuable. But you can't keep unless you got a Christian McCaffrey gets down in week 1. You have to hold on to for 9 or 10 weeks. Most people are going to cut even a higher draft pick. They're going to cut them after.
When? Halfway through?
Well, yeah, even as early as week 4 to 6. One other thing we haven't even talked too much in detail about draft strategies, but one of the things you have to learn, I think, pretty quickly is which positions to draft highest in the roster in terms of draft rounds, because a lot of people, especially novices, they seem to think that the quarterback's the #1 position in the NFL, and the quarterback can generate a lot of points in fantasy, and they can. Not only for them, but other members of their team. But the problem that you got to remember with quarterbacks is the very top quarterbacks, the first tier, maybe 3 or 4 quarterbacks in fantasy, those quarterbacks are going to go pretty quickly. The problem with drafting quarterbacks too high, in my opinion, is the quarterbacks, although they do generate points, almost all starting quarterbacks in the NFL generate fantasy points. They have to by the nature of their position. So even if they're losing games as a team, they're still winning points on
Gotcha.
the field because they're still passing the ball. So, for example, with quarterbacks, the number 9 quarterback in fantasy for the year and the number 1 quarterback, there'll be a gap, but it won't be as big a gap as you might think. And you can pick up a quarterback in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th tier in the NFL ratings. You can pick them up down around draft round 8, draft round 7. You can pick up a good quarterback then. In the meantime, you've been using your earlier picks to get the skill position players, where there is more of a dichotomy between the top tiered running backs and the number 12 running backs. There's a lot more points differential there. So that's why I always do not, very rarely would I draft a quarterback above the 4th or 5th round earlier because they're just
But
not
it has
worth
been done.
Oh, it has been done. You've done it. You've done it every year now. Patrick Mahomes, because of his uncanny ability to throw the ball all over the place and throw it to his wideouts and his backs and everybody else, and putting points on the field. He puts up a tremendous run. So you're looking at somebody like that. Well, that's 400 points. I'd like to have those 400 points.
But another good example of your strategy there was what at Stafford that Ryan, remember?
Yeah, Matt
Costigan?
Stafford.
Stafford came
See,
back, and I
yeah.
mean, he was scoring a lot of points. But he was what was his number in the
I
draft?
think Matt
Probably.
Stafford was drafted in the 8th or 9th round.
Yeah, bottom.
And the drop off from, say Allen and Mahomes to Stafford wasn't that much.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
could have loaded up
It
on
was a good
running back.
example.
You could have loaded up on quality wide receivers and running backs.
And Ryan did.
Who would have made up
Yeah.
that difference and
Yeah.
then some.
And when you do your research, especially as a novice, you will find plenty of articles out there on drafting strategy. And I highly recommend you review some of those because you got to get a sense and an idea of how you build a roster successfully to have a chance to win a fantasy championship.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you really want to win, you'll tune into Ike and Terry right here on YouTube.
But drafting strategy could be a whole other podcast. But basically, the traditional method espoused by most experts is what you call the 2 running back draft scheme, which basically means the first 2 rounds of the draft you draft running backs. Now, this was developed years ago when the NFL was a much more run-oriented offense. The reason why I feel it's still an effective strategy is because now, although it's not as much of a run-oriented league by any stretch, it's totally pass-oriented. What it still happens is running backs, the top tier running backs has gotten much smaller. So instead of maybe having 20 running backs in the National Football League
Yeah,
from
you're
a
down to-
fantasy standpoint to be worthwhile, now you're looking more like 6 to 10.
Wow.
And so
Not
if
much to pick
if
from.
you've got that few choices to pick from to add meaning to your roster, and you don't start picking running backs off the first 2 rounds, you go with Tyreek Hill or Patrick Mahomes or somebody like that or Travis Kelce, they're going to produce points for you, but you're not going to have a running back for that position either. And when you start picking running backs, you're going to be taking more of a speculative role because you're going to be taking guys that haven't really done anything in the league in terms of fantasy, and you're just taking a shot as to whether speculative shot as to whether that person's actually going to do anything, and you're going to have to do that because you've already passed up the opportunity to pick one of the proven running backs in the NFL and fantasy. And like I said, with the pass happy league, and they're doing much more platooning of running backs now. They didn't used to do that. It used to be your 2 starting running backs on a league team. You could figure they were going to carry 95% of the balls that year.
Not anymore.
You can't do that anymore because they have rosters that are much deeper on running backs.
And
they're
tight
all-
ends.
And they're all positional now, running back that's at the 20-yard line isn't going to be out there carrying the ball at the 2-yard line because they got somebody else for that. Or they like to pass the ball down at the goal line, which in the old days in the NFL was considered anathema. You never threw the ball down at the 2-yard line. You ran it.
So that's solid advice. 2 running backs. That's
That's what my husband has been saying
yeah,
since
you
we
know,
started.
That's kind of what I've been. Lately I've been kind of switching up a little bit. But it's still, if you're a newbie, that's probably the safest way to go. Is to go out and get 2
That
stud
and wide
running
receivers.
backs. 2 stud running backs. Wait a little bit on the quarterback. Load up on wide receivers.
Yeah.
There you go.
You got to look with the pass happy offense as
Yeah.
the league is now. You've got to have wideouts, a lot of them.
And you got to watch a lot of football. We watch, Terry and I, we have a routine. We watch the Red Zone. We get up in the morning, and it's football all day long, Red Zone. But the more you watch, and especially if your opponents in your league aren't watching, you could pick up some intel that could be very insightful.
But ladies, this is why it's competitive for you, is that you don't have to be a man in this sport anymore to win the game. You can actually pick the right team, and it doesn't have to be one team because you get to pick out of all the teams.
Yeah, the part about Red Zone, I forget fandom and watching the NFL anyway. I think the Red Zone is the best thing NFL ever did in regards to watching NFL football on Sundays because you see literally every scoring play.
Yep.
And you don't.
And
have
you get
any
the replay.
ads. It starts with the 1 o'clock kickoffs. It goes till 7:30, 8 o'clock, depending on the length of the latter games. And it's nonstop bop, and it's
Yep.
by far the best way to watch. And from a fantasy standpoint, it's even better in terms of learning the players, learning the schemes, watch developing trends as the season starts out. What is this offense doing down at the 20-yard line, 10-yard line? You'll see all that because you get to see all this offense in one location. You don't have to worry about slow stretches of games where nobody's doing anything. You get to see a lot of action going on. Even if they miss a play because they're covering 8 games at the same time, they'll pick it up and you'll get to see it. And
I have
you don't
one-
have to do anything.
I have one.
I've actually lost a little bit of weight because when you're watching Red Zone, you have to run fast to get your beer to get back so you don't miss anything. So you get your cardio. I get my cardio watching the Red
But
Zone.
We usually work it out so that we stop by about week 14 or week
Yeah,
15
playoffs start 14. And
Right.
Usually the championship is week 17 or something.
or 16. Usually
16,
you try
yeah,
for
16,
16
yeah,
because we found
yeah.
over time that week 17 is a real wild card in the NFL. At that point in time, you got starters that don't play,
Yeah, sitting,
or they
yeah.
play one series and they sit down. They don't do anything.
Because
can't
you don't want
set
them
up-
injured for the.
Yeah,
can't
so
set a roster up
want
for
you
that.
don't want a league that has their championship game in the last game of the season.
Well, the one thing I did notice last year with my team, even though I was successful, is that I had a lot of teams on the same bye week. Is that something that you should be looking at?
You usually, yeah, part of the, like I said earlier, we could do a whole show on the
Yeah.
draft strategies. But one of the things you would be doing in your draft strategizing is, when I draft, I always have a list of the bye weeks, so that I can try to avoid that. I'm not always successful at it because I get excited in the draft and I see a player I really want, and I just happen to forget the fact that he's also in the same bye week.
And
as
if they're
somebody
the
else
same
that works
position,
out.
it kind of gets
Right.
you locked.
Well, it kind of
Yeah.
it kind of weakens your lineup for that.
Yeah, I had that.
Yeah, so you have to look. You have to keep a list usually. I usually keep a list by weeks because the bye weeks, with 32 teams in the National Football League, bye weeks go from 4 to 12 or 13 weeks of the season. So you got, once week 4 starts, where bye weeks occur, and some weeks it's 4 teams on the bye, some weeks it's 6 teams on the bye. You have to know that, and you have to know which
See,
ones
that-
are
I
on
need
the
to-
bye
I need
when
to
you're
get more on that.
drafting, because you don't want to end up with 5 people on your roster all on the same bye.
And
same
that's
week.
when you start getting rid of the ones on your bench, getting rid of the ones on your bench that you don't want to get rid of.
Right.
But you have to because you got so many people on bye.
There's so many people on bye, and your reserves haven't really produced yet, and the gamble you took on
So
speculating.
now your
on that
whole
person,
roster is going to change.
You got to work the free agency. We were talking earlier about static and dynamic. Keep in mind, part of the dynamic nature of your roster is free agency. Very important. Free agents pop up. All of a sudden, you see a guy that didn't get drafted at all, who's taking off, and he's scoring significant points early on in the season, and he's trending upward. Well, you want to try to get a hold of that person. If they're usually going to be better than somebody you've got on your roster that you're holding on to in reserve, go free agent. Try to pick them up. Free agent rules also differ and change based on the league. Some leagues, especially money leagues, you have to actually pay money for free agents.
Yep, done that.
Years
fake
ago,
money, fake money, monopoly money. It's
Yeah.
not your money. It's
not your
monopoly
money.
that they give to you at the beginning of the season.
well, no, the money league I was in for years, you paid at the end of the season. You settled up with the commissioner. You wrote a check or paid for your free agent costs. And I had one year where I had the running back that used to play at San Diego and ended up with the Rams.
LaDainian Thomas? No. the
Yeah,
Rams.
LaDainian Thomas.
Yeah.
I had LT, and LT, when the Rams were in their glory years, was 20 years ago, the St. Louis Rams were, with Kurt Warner, were scoring all
Oh, you're
these
talking
points.
of Marshall Falk.
That's what I'm talking
Marshall
about.
Falk.
Marshall
Yeah.
Falk.
Yeah.
Marshall Falk was a great running back for the Rams, and he was torching the place. He was money on fantasy, and I had him one year as my first round draft pick, and he was kicking ass. And then he got to a game where he got injured, and like eighth or ninth week in, he gets banged up. Well, he's not going to be out for the rest of the season, but he's going to be out of that offense for a couple of weeks. And his backup was a young running back named Trung Candidate.
Oh, well, yeah.
And Trung Candidate was, nobody had him. Nobody even knew he existed, because who's going to sit?
But you
Marshall
picked him up?
Faulk? Oh no, I got in a bidding war
Oh,
another
that's how you
owner.
lost your money.
with another owner that really wanted Trung Candidate too, and he ran me up right to pay back in those days $22, which was a lot of money, cash for a player. But I did
That's a
it.
case of beer.
Did you
And
win?
you know what Trung Candidate did for me? He won me 2 more weeks of the 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the fantasy roster. While now it happened to be a season where I won the championship, but it cost me money. But he was a player well worth it.
So how much did you win on your championship?
Well, back in those days, most of the years where we went, the money on the free agency pool went into the pool for payout for prizes.
Oh, gotcha.
So the more free agent transactions occur, more auctioning, more money. That all went into the kick. One year, I think I won over $600.
Woohoo!
That was a while back, but yeah, I won pretty consistently there for a while. I had a good run.
Right on.
That's good.
Well, Paul, man, it's so cool to have you. But we're still going to pick your brain for one more thing. Super Bowl prediction. Who you see going to the Super Bowl this year? Tell me who's going to go and who's going to win.
Who's going to go? I'd say from the NFC, probably. I wouldn't pick against the Rams again, so I'd say probably Rams from the NFC, and in the AFC, I would say it's probably going to be a bounce back year. For even without Tyreek Hill, I still think the Chiefs, and the tough schedule they just drew, I still think the Chiefs are going to be a valid contender for the Super Bowl. So I'd probably say Rams, Chiefs in the finals, and probably the Rams.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
What
Terry,
about you?
What? Who? Me?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Cowboys. I know the Cowboys are going to be in it, and they'll break my heart. So Cowboys will lose to the Bengals.
And I'm going to take San Diego and Denver because we've got Russell Wilson, and I think they are going to stomp some.
No, but San Diego and
They're in
Denver
the same
can't be in.
division.
They're in the same. They're in the same.
Same
conference.
division and conference. They can't.
Well,
say.
with fantasy football, I can't. Come on. I know. We don't go to the
All right,
playoffs.
So who? Denver
then it-
or San Diego? Which who you think's going to be?
San Diego.
Okay, so who's going to be the?
Then it would
NFC?
be the Rams.
Okay, and then who's going to win?
San Diego.
Okay, we got that down. All right, Paul. All of our guests get a special gift for being on the show. So let me go and get that gift for you right now.
Ready?
By the way, you'll
Here
happen
it
to
comes.
you'll happen to notice in the last few minutes we referred to the Chargers as San Diego because we're all.
I know they're LA
We're
now.
LA.
They're LA.
Oh no!
There you go.
A beer.
Big giant beer.
Oh dear!
Here, let's get on this. Get it in frame. Can we get that in frame? There you go. Big giant bear for Paul.
Big giant beer float.
Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll have you back, and we're going to follow you. We'll check in with you at the season, probably on Zoom. We'll check in with you to see how things are going for the Gray Panthers.
All right. Well, good luck with your blog, guys.
I appreciate it. Thank